about what happens in an educational campus and the way they use sort of English to subdue us and oppress us. And immediately when you were talking about discrimination, am I audible enough? Okay, so yeah, the first instance that this is louder. Okay, the first instance that came to my mind was when I was part of a delegation that went to IIT Madras to meet the director and ask him about, what are you going to do with the reservation policy? You're not implementing it at all. And so, technically IIT Madras is one institute. Can I move here? IIT Madras is one institute that sort of actually stands for Iyer Iyengar Trust. That's what we, off the record we call it, because there's so much of Brahmin domination there. And this guy, I'm sitting with a Dalit political leader, and then, we are an entire team of, NGOs, IAS officers, political leaders, and we're saying, like, you have supposed to, it's in the constitution, it's right there in your act and statutes that you have to enforce reservation, you have to implement reservation policy. So what have you done? And you have about 420 faculty. So you have given 2 Dalits, two Dalits are there, and maybe somebody who is an Adivasi is there, and there are about 18 to 20 OBC staff, and OBC staff again have a wonderful way of merging with the Brahmin community. So 2 of them are actually wearing sacred threads also, so we are not even sure if they are OBC or not OBC. So we are saying there are about 22.5 Dalits in the campus, Dalits and OBCs in the campus. So is this how you understood the reservation? It's about, percentage, 22.5%, which means we should at least have 88 or 89 Dalit staff in the IIT. And we, keep talking about this point, and we also say, like, how many of us, we know people who applied, and they've never heard back from the university. And also we try to talk. We in the sense of who was on the panel. So we tell him, like, if you had issued an advertisement, and this is what all education institutes are doing, if they issue an advertisement in the newspaper, we can drag them to court, say that they have not mentioned the number of vacancies, they have not mentioned the reservation policy, we can get a stay. We can get a say on it. But what they do is they say there's a standing advertisement, and basically the standing advertisement is one way in which all Dalits are weeded out. So that the advertisement of the post is open all year round, and whoever they want is selected. If it's one of them, if it's one of us, they say there is no job. So you don't even know if the job exists or not as long as the candidate is there. So when in the midst of this kind of very heated argument, the director says, we can appoint Dalit faculty, that's not a problem, but what is he going to do in front of some of the most best brains of India? And his exact words are, this man switches into Tamil and he says, but the Dalit faculty, faced with the IIT, this kind of brilliant, shining, whatever the IIT students are, he will only stare in front of them. He will not be able to answer them. He will not be able to take the question. So it's not only that they are demeaning or degrading students and saying, okay, your English is not good enough. They say that when you become a faculty member, when you are teaching at the same institute, they say that you don't have any quality. You cannot even handle the students. You don't know English enough. You cannot control a class of that kind of so-called intelligent students, and therefore you're unfit to be a faculty in the department. Not because you don't have any qualifications, because you cannot handle a class of our students. This is exactly what was coming out from the director at that point of time was MS Anand, and he has been there in that post, occupying that post for more than the last 10 years. So what you observe there, again, irrespective of whether we are students learning English or whether we are teachers teaching English, is that they have made English into an entire caste by itself. So that in India, gender is a marker, class is a marker, caste is a marker, and just like that, this English knowledge, English speaking status, whether you can speak English or not, that becomes another marker of privilege, another ground for discrimination. If you can speak the language, okay. If you cannot speak the language, that's one more reason why they oppress you. So it becomes, for some reason, it has become this, this another marker of privilege in our language. And I don't exactly know where to start, but if you look at Chandraban, of course, talks about Ambedkar's argument. When asked in Aurangabad, he did say that English medium education is going to be helpful. But even before Ambedkar, at least in the Tamil context, Ayodhya Pandita, he was vehemently pushing for English, not only in terms of education, but also, trying to highlight the structure of, native languages, and trying to say that all these, the English language does not have any casteism inbuilt in the language. English language does not have communalism in the language, and therefore it is, a better language than Sanskrit, it's a better language than Tamil. And he makes out this point very clearly when he talks about English especially. And he also says wherever the English people have gone, and I mean, even though it can from today, when you look back, when you read it from today and read it with this kind of Brahminical lens that it has been provided to each of us, we can think, oh, he was really very close to the British Raj, he was he acting like a competitor or something. But he says that wherever the English have gone, they have taken human rights with them, and he uses this word, in the 1800s, I mean the 1880s or something like that. So even at that point, he makes it very clear that this language has a certain egalitarian potential when it is applied in the Indian context. And he says, okay, so this is one reason why that language should be learned. And if you look at Ayodhya Pandit, I mean, he's talking about this, and he as an intellectual, he's making this strong point for English. At the next stage, Periyar, who borrows and draws on Ayodhya Pandit, of course without acknowledging him directly, but he's been extremely influenced by him. What he says in several contexts, he goes somewhere and calls Tamil the savage language. It's a language of barbarians. He calls it a Katumarandi Mori, the language of barbarians. But irrespective of all this, Periyar's own browsers, Tamil and all that, Periyar is somebody who said English is going to be, everywhere, to such an extent that it's going to, Tamil is going to disappear from our bedrooms and kitchens. So when Periyar is talking about this, using this metaphor of, the language of, the native language disappearing from the bedroom and the kitchen, is basically, I think, talking about the cultural sphere, even in intimacy, even in where, it's also important that we study the fact, within a classroom, we see how does it function there. So what I found from, I used to teach at the Anna University, and from among my students, as well as I was carrying out research among a lot of students from neighboring city colleges and students who were taking the preparatory course at the IIT. And what I could see was that we are clearly at a disadvantage. Dalits and the OBCs or the most backward classes are at a clear disadvantage when it comes to English. And while it's very easy, for somebody like the Vice Chancellor to say, you're not speaking proper English, or for some director like Anand to say, a Dalit faculty can't handle classes. If you look at a classroom where the teaching is supposed to take place in English, and where of course the teaching takes place in broken English, but what happens to the student who cannot express himself or herself in English? What I find is that the students might have great ideas about engineering, great ideas about the science or whatever is being taught, but because they are unable to speak in English, at that time they are rendered like mute. They really, even if they know so much information, because English is this, your knowledge in English actually becomes the arbitrator of, what knowledge you possess, irrespective. You might know a lot of it, you might be able to speak, all this very thoroughly in your mother tongue, but then English again becomes the deciding factor. It becomes the factor of your expression, so that even if you know more, you really can't talk about it. And then there's this total unfair disadvantage at which, Dalit and most backward class and BC children are. So another thing is that, okay, so this is one way of, you can look at it and how this is happening. But statistically, and at least as far as the engineering colleges of Tamil Nadu are concerned, you can get the data from the government data center and analyze it. And what you observe is that if you look at who has been through mother tongue medium education, because it's not that mother tongue medium education means getting educated in Tamil does not in any way say that your English is going to be bad. But for some reason, the English that's being taught in your school has been, let's say, more diluted or not that prim and proper. So the ones who go to mother tongue medium schools, because that's one way in which we measure the accessibility to the language, is that for every 10 children who are going to mother tongue medium schools, about 7 are Dalit children and the other 3 are MBC. I could not even find, the percentage of OBC is really negligible. Even percentage of even other backward classes is negligible. Imagine the percentage of Brahmin or upper caste, dominant caste students who will be ever going to these Tamil medium education institutions. It's one way in which, they sort of replicate the entire caste hierarchy, because if your accessibility to English is again along the same lines of caste, then certainly you are going to be disadvantaged, you are going to be disempowered, where English itself is an empowering factor, where it's a decisive factor, where it's an influential factor. So, and then the statistics is something that we must keep in mind, because one is accessibility to language, and another thing is these students are immediately called in college education often, I mean at least this technical education or the so-called education that that pays, the typical education that is capable of letting them establish careers for themselves, professional education for instance, becoming engineers or doctors. I mean most of it is only taking place in the English medium. I mean of course Anna University did start a Tamil medium course, the textbooks were all translated overnight, but I don't know how effective it is because we still have not seen the first batch of students who have passed out from those courses. So, when technical education, when things like this operate, you are in a classroom and there are students who are openly from mother tongue medium schools, and it's not only that, it's just like you're in any classroom and there are students from mother tongue medium education schools, and these students belong to the Dalits and the most backward classes. What also happens is this knowledge of English, it's sort of, it's one deciding factor that decides which stream that you get. So these students are, I mean, even though they might have, good cutoff marks and they might get into Anna University, but I mean, of course, English is not at all taken as a factor for your seat. But if you're from a rural area and you've not scored that much, and there's this whole caste hierarchy where ECE or IT, electronic and communication engineering, or IT or computer science, these are all the so-called Brahminical batches that only the very best go there. And then they have some Shudra subjects, some Dalit subjects, and these Shudra subjects are irrigation engineering, printing technology, mining technology. So that the teachers immediately tell you, okay, these are printing technology students, these are irrigation science students, agricultural and irrigation science students. So they are all from Tamil medium. It's immediately it's immediately assumed that these students are from Tamil medium, and that's why or their English is very weak and faulty. So it's not only that on one aspect. We can talk about streaming, we can talk about, I mean, there are, of course, I think there will be somebody in the audience from ELT background. So how do you even talk about streaming when already there are these kinds of divisions that, divide the students? And within a classroom, again, what I observed is, this whole topic of Dalits in English, yes, there are so many other ramifications, but forgive me for, dragging it back all the time to the classroom. I think this is where it plays out with its whole vicious face. It's where it plays out in all its potential. So what again happens is that this whole dynamics of who gets to talk in the classroom, because I mean if we are in ELT, we know that in the classroom there are only a limited number of learning opportunities. There are only a limited number of times in which a teacher can ask a question and get it answered. A limited number of times in which she can give students opportunity to take part in the education, so that okay, there we are working out something and somebody can say, okay, this is the answer to this question, madam. And we all know that in a classroom these are very highly limited. Maybe if the teacher is good enough, she can create 20 or 10 learning opportunities. So what happens is who gets to take these turns, and I mean along what lines do these turn taking take place? Are all students given an equal opportunity? And what happens, sometimes, and the way they are using this, this within English classrooms, if they want to, put a student in her place or put a student in his place, and it's a Dalit student, they are going to ask this very difficult question so that the student cannot answer, and then the student has to remain silent, for the rest of the term, unable to answer, unable to, even participate in the class. And mostly this turn taking, or this using all the resources in the classroom, the conversation is entirely between these elite upper class children, I mean, who have been to this so-called posh schools. So it's a discourse between them and the teacher. It's like everybody else is excluded. We are only allowed to watch what happens in that kind of a classroom instead of actually taking part. And another fact is that why it becomes problematic and why I think there is no democracy in this kind of English language learning environment is because unlike what education used to be, English teaching used to be many years ago, where the teacher would come to the class and actually just give a lecture to the entire class. Now we are falling back on the system of activity-based learning or task-based teaching. And this task-based teaching is something where, let's say groups are divided, you give them, chances, there's somebody in charge of a group who has to, all these kinds of activities where there's, you sort of devolve power from the teacher and, put it in the hands of students. And again, students are, replaying the same caste, things, so that who gets picked out from a group to go and represent the group. Who decides what the group actually has to talk about, or who picks these topics? It's naturally the person who is more efficient in language, or who has had more access and exposure to English. And So I mean, this is again I think something that has been quite problematic, where the Dalit and most backward children have been concerned, because they are unable to put themselves ahead because of the way in which power operates in the classroom. And another fact that I found was, I mean, this is what all language learning theories repeatedly emphasize, that the kind of language that you learn, at least Stephen Krashen talks about comprehensible input. So how much of the language are you able to get into yourself? And so what's the kind of language exposure that Dalit students have as compared to students who are talking with their parents in English all the time? So there are these levels of privilege, and again, so when you don't even get to hear the language, how are you going to be good at it? So doesn't it actually put us at a disadvantage? And another angle, what we also observe is that there are many theories, again, like language learning theories, where they say there is more learning that takes place outside the classroom than within the classroom, especially acquiring a language. So our students get this chance to use English in as many informal settings as the rest of the other students? So and again, how does this entire thing work on this caste and English? How does it work on gender lines? Because for some reason, for girls, I mean, they're all teenage students, so for girls at some point it becomes cool if they talk in English, if they say all these things like, wow, beautiful, even if it's just one or two words, it carries a certain personality with it, being cool and talking in English. Whereas for boys of that age, the more they use their mother tongue, the more cool it is, so that they keep calling each other macha, mama, things like that, so that even the chances in which they would otherwise be interacting in English is lessened, because those students who are from the privileged backgrounds also don't want to speak in English. They want to speak in the mother tongue in order to be cool, in order to be part of the in group. And something else, I mean, we've always been talking about how the syllabus should be reformed, the syllabus has to change, and this is, I mean, ever since you had anything called the history of ELT, we've had this huge obsession about the syllabus. And no matter how many times we revise the syllabus, no matter how we change it, I don't think anybody looks at it from a student's perspective, from a working class perspective. It's totally like you look at the text and you look at it from a grammar perspective. For instance, I was teaching first semester students, and I think the second exercise in this textbook for technical English is how to apply for a visa. How do you apply for your visa in order to go to a foreign country? And so this is a 3-page reading exercise. Based on that, there are 2 writing activities, 1 grammar activity, 1 group discussion activity. And applying for a visa might be something. There are some students in the same class, the NRI students whose the fees basically pay the teachers. So these NRI students are ones, it's like give them a form, they fill their village as New York City. They say, I was born there, ma'am. So in the same class you have students who say their village is New York City. In the same classroom you have students for whom, Chennai itself is like a foreign country. This is the first time in a big city. They're like, ma'am, we are yet to see Spencer, we are yet to go to the beach. So for these students who are basically in a cultural shock about this big city, and who are trying to, as teenagers, negotiate this space, try to find themselves in it, try to see what's the instinct to wear and how they should behave. And when they are caught up in all this, and you have this chapter on how to apply for a visa, I mean, how far can you push the student? How much can you alienate him? There's somebody with a US passport, and there's somebody who is, thinking of, just from where am I going to get my first pair of jeans? So, are we in the same classroom, and what are we actually doing to, these kinds of encounters within the text, where the students are really told basically, this is not for you? And is that not the language that the text is speaking, when it has things that are totally inaccessible, things that they cannot really relate to at all? And then now talking about this, this politics, which we all have to address. What do you think about Chandraban Prasad, and what do you say about Kancha Ilaya? David Gradol, he has this book called, he was involved in the British Council, and he has this book called English Next, which talks about English in the subcontinent, especially the English in India, and he looks at the future. And what he says is that his argument is that his entire study was funded by the British Council, but what he says is that he goes back to the UNESCO finding that only when if you learn in your mother tongue, you're better educated, you get a better grasp of the concept. And he says that this entire craze about English, this craze about sending your children to English medium schools, that's bringing down the standard of education in India. It's bringing down, it's lowering the intellectual standards, the IQ standards of Indian children, because he says they are not learning in their mother tongues and they are anyway not learning English all that properly. So is any learning taking place at all in any of the subjects? He's not only looking at English, he's looking at it in a much more broader perspective, and he says it's entirely wrong to emphasize this importance of English for Indians. And so that was the finding of his book, you know. I mean, this entire project work that he did for the British Council called English Next. But the British Council also has been sort of really excited about Mr. Chandrabhan Prasad and his idea of, you know, what is English. And I mean, how do you look at what Chandrabhan is saying in those terms? I mean, especially, I mean, how would I look at it being an English teacher? So, what I would like to say that is that, yes, I mean, I'm not sure if, you know, I mean, so, do you say, you know, do you go back to Macaulay's minutes or talk about it? Or, as an English teacher, I think, we're not going to gain anything by saying, okay, let's keep English out. Or you know, to get the whole counter argument, and by, you know, all this hyping of English, in some ways it's not that bad. That would be my opinion, because what I feel is that when it's become another marker of privilege, it's become another and again what I would like to tell in India is that it's not how good your English is, how good your writing is, because very often, I mean, especially on YouTube and other places, I get a lot of troll messages, and they are like, you know, you have a bad Tamil accent. So it's not like I really write, you know, poetry, which people say is good and all that. It's like, no matter how good you are, I mean, when you come from a certain position, you know, anybody can turn it against you and say, okay, you have a bad English accent. So what if I try to imitate the British accent or American, they'll say, oh, she's trying to be so, she's just been abroad for a couple of months and she's now trying to imitate. So if somebody wants to get back at you for English, and they can do it, I think, in thousands and thousands of ways. So so that's one thing. I mean, like, forget being judged by society, but still, English can be used as a double-edged sword to even hit back at you, even when you're writing in the same language. And what this whole idea of, you know, English for the development discourse, I think, you know, it's right now at a position in which you cannot ignore English, and you cannot, especially if you're looking at higher education, we cannot say, okay, let's get it done without, you know, let's go ahead without English. I don't think it's really that feasible practically. And also, we have to look at English as a, and this is something that I have also been saying, you know, when Ayodhya Tata says that English does not have any casteism inbuilt in it, I also think that in many ways it's a very neutral language. And I can say this because, you know, if you are, you know, in a group of people who are all, like let's say Tamils, Tamil Brahmin ladies have this, I'm not even sure it's the men, they have this wonderful tendency of talking to you in their Tamil Brahmin accent and expecting a reply from you in Tamil. So that they just want to know, okay, is she one of us? Is she not one of us? So and what do you do when somebody talks like this? Do you? I mean, like, even yesterday I was telling my friends, you see, you have crash course, learn English in 10 days, learn Spanish in 30 days. You have no crash course, learn Brahmin accent in 10 days. You have no crash course for, you know, this kind of a masking. Not that anybody has to mask, but still, you don't have any of these. So, I mean, in that sense, when you know, we are using English, at least we are not giving away our caste identity. We are not telling anybody where we come from. Okay, I mean, like, my father, for instance, he can always, you know, like, listen to anybody and immediately place them geographically, place them, you know, because if you know well enough, if you met enough people, if you traveled around, you are capable of doing this. And this is something that's betrayed by all our regional languages. So, in some sense, English is a neutral language. If you want to, I mean, everybody will say, yes, identity is important, we have to assert it, but sometimes it becomes costly to, you know, even reveal or diverge your identity. So what do you do in those cases? And again, for Dalits, when Ilya is talking about, you know, okay, the vernacular languages must be destroyed, we have to also look at the other picture, is that just like women are made, you know, the burden of culture is foisted on women. The burden of protecting languages, especially the vernacular language, is being foisted on Dalits. Is it foisted, or is it something that they are the ones who are using, let's say, the more purer forms of the vernacular language, or are they the ones who are in many ways being custodians of the regional culture, custodians of Tamil, in fact? because they have resisted Sanskritization, they have resisted Hindutvaization. So do we look at it that way? And I mean, and another factor is that for some reason everybody seems to be connecting learning English with, so should we destroy our languages, or how can we balance being a Tamil nationalist with also saying that okay, people should learn English? I don't think I think they're in some way not, I won't say they're mutually exclusive, but they can be two different things. You can be a Tamil nationalist as well and then aspire to learning or teaching English. So I mean, I know this is a grey area, but my opinion would be that when we're talking about things that could have an impact on policy, especially something like language learning, I don't think being alienated or being left out is a solution to it. So I think that's about it. Now we can have questions or interaction.
And the kind of English used by feminists and also lesbian writers. So, don't you think this challenges the notion that English is an egalitarian language?
Yeah, no, English of course has all the, let's say, all this, like our languages have, what you call man-made language idea in which women are naturally degraded and subjugated and things like that. There's no denying that. English again does not have as many caste markers as other languages have, other Indian languages have. And this whole talk about, black English being different from, what the white speak or what is considered the received pronunciation. I think that's not going to apply to an Indian context, because we're not like, there's nobody going to be speaking those dialects of, black English here. Bonix or something. Nobody is going to be speaking that in India so that you can say, okay, black English, we are all going to be speaking, a very bad, whatever the
persons who are coming from these backgrounds, they should also know the names of the authors. Now the author courses are Nietzsche, Derrida, Foucault. In the classroom itself, they ask, in the first day of the classroom, they ask you that, have you heard of these names? When you say no, you have to drop out the book. And the politics behind this is
names dropping.
Yeah, names dropping. That makes these people who are coming from this background to drop out there itself. And not to become a scholar, to come forward. In front of
all these
people
French feminists and French intellectuals, they are like, I think Brahmins would like to put them close to the Vedas so that they alone can quote them and unquote them. So, and you tried, mispronouncing Foucault, and it's like you really haven't read anything at all. I know.
I'm sure that most of these people who are coming from these backgrounds, they never heard of this name.
No, okay. See, I'm not sure we are as close to eradication, but what I would like to say is, nobody in our country we have not done a systematic study of class within education. Caste within education institutions within the classroom, because during the course of my study, I also got to interview many people, and once I and my guide met this guy. He's a professor of physics, so he tells me. I'm there with my guide, and he gives this example of how to distinguish backward class and Dalit students. He says you should ask a question to the backward class student, and you should ask him the same question after he has answered it. He says the second time you ask the backward class student the same question, the student is going to stare back at you. He uses the sound word morepa. It's like angry, he's going to stare back at you. He says, whereas if you ask the same question, the question first to the Dalit student, and repeat the same question to the Dalit student, the Dalit student, he says, somebody who's going to get confused. He's going to rethink his answer. Imagine this guy, he's a physics professor, but his